It's my sheer privilege to introduce Aya. I met Aya in 2016 and we started PCC together. And so one thing I would say, like, you're one of the smartest person I've met. It's just like when people just start talking, you know what's going on. I was like, wow, the level of comprehension and take it and like really find the meaning of it in such a short period of time. I was intimidated by you in the beginning. It's like wonderful. And more than that, we stayed in touch in spite of all the different places about your story. Means, people come to PCC because they're longing for something. You fight it your way into PCC. Fight it everything which is stopping you. And that made me honor what PCC is. And you bring that warrior energy of doing what is right for yourself, for the world. And thank you for being you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Deepak, for that beautiful introduction, and thank you all for coming. If y'all don't know, I was born and raised in Iran until I was 11, after which we moved to the States. So I grew up in Islam. In fact, my grandfather's favorite stories to tell were Islamic stories of Muhammad and Moses and Noah. And then we moved to America and the stories changed. They became about Jesus and Krishna and Buddha. And as I got older, they became about scientists like Galileo and Einstein. It wasn't until I came to PCC in 2016 that I was introduced to names like Jung and Graf, or Tarnas and Swimme. Even though all the stories changed and had their own nuances, the one thing that stayed consistent has been the human factor. Human beings trying to understand what is happening and how do we fit into it. And that's probably the question that brings almost every one of us here. So since 2016, I've been integrating everything that I'm learning here from y'all and anything that I might have from previous life, along with any expanded states of consciousness, and trying to get an idea of what this narrative is. And what is coming up is a archetypal developmental cosmology that is based on a cosmic birth process that is taking place at this very moment in all scales and all dimensions of time and space in fractal form. Now, before we can get into that, let's start out with the birth cycle. If you're familiar with Stan Grof's work, you know that he splits the birth process. It's in a cycle, probably more circular than mine. And it's a 4-step process that he divides into 4 perinatal birth processes. And BPM 1 is a unity, it's oneness, followed by BPM 2 a contraction, that leads into BPM 3 a life and death struggle that is a violent separation that is completed in BPM 4 as the fetus dies and the infant is born. So here, where the fetus or the infant is born, we can see that the womb doesn't go away. The womb stays where it is, and it has potential to continue going through more birth processes. And the infant is now its own new being that is capable of going through its own birth processes or to contribute to them. So what we then see is an internalization of the birth process and this continuous spiral of wombs giving birth to wombs in this differentiation. So if we take this back to the birth of the cosmos. What we see, let's go all the way to the very beginning, and there is just one. There is unity, there is no movement, there is no time, there is no experience, there is the one. And within this one are all of the archetypes in unmanifested and structured form, the DNA of the cosmos. And from this one, through the flaring forth, comes two in the form of a polarity. The subjective and the objective, the unconscious and the conscious, the masculine and the feminine. In the interaction of these polarity comes the third, as that experience that is being had within the experience, between this polarity. And through that third comes the fourth as the unity of the birth process. Now this can be understood a little bit more easier if I mention the axiom of Maria, which says that from one comes two, from two comes three, and from the third comes the fourth as the one. So then we can see that fourth step being a unifying force that brings together the three and makes it a new entity, a new being. Just like that infant was a new being that came out of that fourth step. So too then, this birth of the polarity, together with the experience, with the interaction that they're having with each other, gives forth this fourth as the one. So in the same way that we can see that in a human being, once we are separated from the womb, we have this desire to return, but we can't. So we then go forth and either as the womb participate in the birth cycle and complete that, or indirectly participate in the creation of life inside of the womb that then goes on and has its own cycle. So in the same way, we can see the second there is the birth of that original polarity, there's a desire to return to PM1, but you can't. So then together they go forth and continue to interact and create more cycles. Then each of those cycles take on their own birth processes, and this is not just external either, this is internal. So then there's this cosmic differentiation in and out in a fractal way. So I would like to invite you to do a little imaginative exercise with me. If you could close your eyes and imagine a spiral. Now don't imagine it going across your field of view, rather see it coming at you with the polarity at the tip, leaving behind it rings that are rippling out. Each of those rings is one birth cycle that has been completed, and each one then continues its own birth cycle. So then you're getting spirals within spirals and rings within rings. And time has a place in this as well. We're in the very beginning when there is nothing and there's just blank. There is no movement, there is no time, there's just is. But once that birth, that first birth comes into view, you have, there was stillness, there is now movement, and there will be further movement. And you get this beginning of time. And that's what we're accessing when we're in expanded states or clairvoyant spaces. This spiral is the movement of the time. And so when we get onto it, we can go up on the spiral and have this cosmic view of everything that is happening. Or we can go down into the spiral and get into the nitty-gritties of what is making everything work and what that material is. So it can be easy to get lost in this objective reality I'm painting. So in order to emphasize that this is a subjective world, this is a conscious world, and it is having a subjective experience of all of these birth processes. So I'd like to think about the polarity as a cosmic lovers, each one completely different from the other in every way possible, and each one consisting of its own set of polarities that internalizes themselves. And they interact with each other in all the possible ways that they can as they spiral through and create moments of experience that have a quality of that interaction that they were having at that very moment that the birth process was completed. And once those moments are born, they are their own entities, and now they have their own cycles that they're going through. and they're at the same time being pulled behind their parents and interacting with each other, within themselves, with the trails of qualitative space-time that they are meeting up with. So what does this mean for us? That's the second part of that $1 million question of what is happening and what does this mean for us? As human beings spiraling through space, embedded within a galaxy, embedded within a solar system, embedded within the Earth, each one a living entity of their own, developing through space-time. What does this mean for us and our responsibility to this cosmic birth process? I don't think I have an answer for that, but one thing I do know that we could do is to use our collective and individual psyches to bring to the conscious level these unconscious birth processes that are happening within us and around us and through us at all times, to bring them up to the conscious mind and interact with them on a more intentional level. And only then can we even claim to have any insight as to our role in the midwifery of this cosmos. That's all. Questions? Concerns? Yes.
Thank you, Aya. So I hear you describe spirals, emerging from spirals. It seems like that's a process of always growing, you know? There's one, becomes more, becomes more, becomes more. Is there space in your idea for the reverse to occur, where things get integrated, spirals collapse?
I haven't seen a spiral collapse in my vision. The way I see it is there's a speed involved as the ripples. If you're watching that spiral come at you, the ripples get slower as they're getting out, and they're faster in the front. And as they're getting, the ones that are in the back are also older, so they have more internalization. And I think part of that expansion and contraction comes in with the birth processes that are going internal are kind of pulling the energy into a different dimension, and then you can have that way. It's not really a collapse, it's more an internalization. And since the cosmos is creating the space that it's then interacting in, I'm not really sure how it would collapse. But I will think about that. Thank you. Nick?
One way of thinking about it might be, if I'm following what you're both saying, one way of thinking about it is that just it's intrinsic to the movement to the fourth perinatal matrix, that is in effect a synthesis of what has preceded it. It both involves the separation that has taken place through the second and third matrix, but it also involves a reunion with the whole. And in fact, in that birth, the birth is a conception within a new womb, so that in one sense, we're always inside the Great Mother, being birthed in one sense out of her, but as soon as we're born, we're born into a vast new cosmos that turns out to be the womb of our next gestation. In a mysterious way. So that's one way of thinking about it, and it connects to Jung's whole idea of the 1 to the 2 to the 3 to the 4 is a description of a dynamic mandala, which is simultaneously a movement and a recollection of the whole. I don't know if that makes sense, but it's a way of seeing how built right into your paradigm there is what Abir is talking about, I think.
Thank you very much.